So welcome everyone. Happy Friday afternoon as of a minute ago. I am Jocelyn Ayre, the director of the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity. I'm joined today by Andrew and Marcus from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, and we're excited to host this webinar for CHFA to share their housing market data, both statewide and specifically for our region here in Litchfield County, and then also tell us about the programs that our affordable housing organizations can benefit from here in Litchfield County. We'll give you share with you some specific examples of projects that have benefited from CHFA programs here in Litchfield County. And we will have time at the end, don't worry, for questions and answers. However, if you do have questions while anyone is talking, you can use the Q&A feature probably at the bottom of your screen to share any questions at any time during the presentation, but we will leave time at the end for your questions. And just a quick reminder, if you're here and you're not from Litchfield County, or you're here from Litchfield County, but you're interested in the housing market data for other parts of Connecticut, we are doing a similar webinar with my colleagues at our other centers for housing opportunity. There will be a Fairfield County version of this webinar where Fairfield County is focused on April 16th. And in May 14th, there will be a version of this where Andrew and Marcus will share specific housing market data for Eastern Connecticut. So if you are in or from or interested in the housing market data for those regions, you can check out that webinar as well. This will be recorded and posted on our website and I think on YouTube as well. So and we can also share the slides specifically with you if you would like them afterwards. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Andrew to get the presentation started.
Sure. Thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you to the Center for having Marcus and I. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Bolger. I'm a senior research and data analyst with CHFA, and with me is Marcus Smith, Director of Research, Marketing, and Outreach. So kind of a quick agenda. What we're going to do is just talk about who CHFA is first, and then talk about some of the housing market trends that we personally track, and then how they kind of inform some of the more recent programs that we've been running to kind of address the need that we're seeing in the market. So first off, who is CHFA? We are one of several different what's called quasi-public agencies in the state of Connecticut. We were established in 1969 as the state's Housing Finance Agency, or HFA. Each state has an HFA with the overall goal of alleviating the shortage of housing needs or housing for low and moderate income households. We do that both on the rental side through actual production and preservation of units, and then on the ownership side, we do that through several different means. I mentioned we're a quasi-public, we're a self-sustaining agency, so we don't necessarily rely on appropriations, but we do occasionally operate programs on behalf of the Department of Housing, some of which Marcus will talk about later. On the homeownership side, we kind of operate in three different ways. We provide to first-time home buyers below market interest rates. We offer down payment and closing cost assistance, and we offer home buyer education as well. It's again restricted to first-time home buyers, and there's also an income component there as well, generally to not exceed 120% of the area median income. And just for example, in Litchfield County, that ranges between roughly $120,000 to $170,000, depending on the household size and location. And then there's also a home price limit for your region. It's anywhere between $537,000 and $650,000. And then on the multifamily side, we pursue the creation of new affordable units. We also look at trying to acquire and convert non-affordable units into affordable units. And we also try to preserve affordable units, both the physical quality of units, but also the affordability and the income restriction there as well. And we do that through several different programs, mainly through the low-income housing tax credit, others like the housing tax credit contribution program, small multifamily loan pool, Bill for CT, and several other products. Again, there's an income component generally with all these products. It varies, but they're generally between anywhere 50 to 80% AMI. And in Litchfield County, you see that ranges for a family of four between $57,000 and $91,000 a year. So that's kind of who CHFA is, but a lot of this presentation we're going to do today is based on our now, I would say, year and a half old housing needs assessment, or H&A for short. And what the H&A is basically a report, all-intensive kind of data document that's intended to serve as a resource for us and for our partners like the center and others to make real-time, informed, data-driven decisions. We're going to talk about kind of three different aspects of the H&A today, looking at demographics and the housing stock in the Connecticut, talk about what's called the housing gap analysis, and then look at more kind of post-pandemic market trends. The H&A itself incorporates data from a wide variety of sources, as you can see there, and it's available on our website through that link, where you'll also find a new dashboard with live and interactive versions of all the charts you're going to see here today. So first and foremost, I like to start these conversations by talking first about the demand and the actual people that are going to end up living in the units that we're talking about preserving and creating. And so kind of the narrative that Connecticut has told itself over the last decade or so is that in terms of population, we're either not growing or just growing a little bit here and there. And what you can see over the last 5 years, this is data from the American Community Survey, is that in some areas we're seeing population increases, in some areas are flat, and those kind of blue bars. But what is universally true across the state is we're seeing an increase in the number of households. The census defines a household as any time someone occupies a new housing unit. So the typical example of household formation being a recent high school or college graduate living with their parents, gets their first job, and moves into their first apartment. So that initial household of 3 is now a household of 2 and a household of 1. And so across the board, we've been seeing households get a bit smaller over the last couple of years. But as you can see in green, no matter where you look, we've seen an increase in the overall number of households. And so for your specific region here, we see population growth of about 1 to 1.5%, but a 4 percentage point increase in the number of households. And that reflects a statewide trend as well. Normally, this is a great thing. We want, household formation, it's an economic driver we want to see, but when we're not pairing it with enough new unit production, that's where some market distortions start to arise. And so this is looking at building permits statewide back to 1966. And what you see is that the vast majority of our building took place pre-1990. Depending on the year you're looking at, we were permitting anywhere between 10 to 20 to approaching 30,000 units in a year in the 80s there. We kind of dropped off into the 90s, but we were still producing or permitting roughly 10,000 units a year. And then the Great Recession hits us, and we see a pretty significant drop in especially production or permits for 1 unit construction in that kind of light green bars. So as I mentioned, this creates several different market distortions, which we'll get into in a minute. But the other thing it does is lead to a rapidly aging housing stock. And so statewide, our median year built housing units is 1969. Nationally, it's 1979. So a near 10-year difference in the median age of housing stock. And when you look at certain areas across the state, particularly in some of our urban areas, in say Hartford or Waterbury, you see zip codes where the median age is above 80 or 90 years old. And also in kind of in your region specifically, there are other areas where the median age in that zip code is well above the state median as well. And then zooming in just on in terms of the makeup of your region's housing stock, I don't think this will surprise anybody, but outside of the Torrington area is primarily that 1 unit detached or that kind of traditional single family home. It's a little bit less so in the Torrington and Winstead areas. And correspondingly, that's where we also see the 2 to 4 units structures, as well as the structures with 5 or more units are primarily located in Torrington and Winstead. The other thing to note is that there's pretty significant median home values across the region, whereas you get towards kind of closer to the New York border, you see pretty significantly higher home values relative to the Torrington area or areas around there as well. So with that as kind of the backdrop for the state and your regional housing stock, the next piece of the H&A is what's called the housing gap analysis. What this is essentially, it tries to estimate the number of additional units by income that are needed for essentially no one in that income bracket to be cost burdened. It's not necessarily a production target, but does point to where additional units or income supports could be useful. It uses data from HUD that is essentially retabulated American Community Survey numbers, and it's used to plan, distribute grants, and demonstrate housing needs like we're doing today. The gap itself is calculated by taking the number of households in a certain income in a certain area, subtracting the total number of affordable units to that income group, taking into account the number of units that are occupied by other income households. And so visually, what it looks like at the state level is this. And so on the left-hand side, you have the total number of, in this case, 0 to 30 AMI renters, shaded by whether or not they're cost burdened or not cost burdened. For those that don't know, cost burden essentially means you're paying more than 30% of your income on housing costs. And then on the right side, you have the total number of units that are affordable to this income group of renters. And they're shaded in dark green if they are occupied by someone in this income group, and in light green if they are those units are occupied by someone at a higher income. And so the gap is made up by the difference in the height of the two bars, but also that light green there as well, the number of units that are occupied by a higher income household. And so statewide, we found a gap of roughly 92,000 units. Again, that's not a production target, but it is useful to compare ourselves to some other estimates that use a similar methodology in the space. But when we look at the Northwest Hills COG specifically, we see a very similar trend to the state at large. Again, we see on the kind of lower income side of the market, we see there are more households than there are units available to this income group. And then on the other side of the market, the renters earning above 80% AMI and above, there are in fact more households earning that income than there are units affordable to those folks. And so what you see in the middle is that there are in fact more units available on the market for folks earning 31 to 80% AMI. But because of shortages at both ends of the market, that creates kind of a filtering effect where folks are either forced to rent up or rent down because of a lack of affordable inventory that's priced for those income groups. So for example, because of a shortage of units at the 0 to 30 AMI renter category, they are then occupying units that are affordable to 31 to 50s, 51 to 80s. And that's it's in part the reason why cost burden rates in this dark blue here are so high for 0 to 30 and 31 to 50.
Andrew, can I just throw something in real quick?
Yeah.
I just want anybody listening who's thinking about what this data means for their specific town in Litchfield County. Again, I just want to note that obviously this is looking at data for the whole region. And so I think we know that some of our small towns just don't really have any rental housing at all. And so, if you're in a smaller town, you very much might need rental housing for folks below 50%, between 30 and 50 and between 50 and 80. But this is averaging the whole region. So I just wanted to note that quickly. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So just to kind of point or put kind of numbers on some of the trends we're seeing. So I mentioned the statewide gap number earlier. The Northwest Hills COG, we find a 2,300 unit gap for the lowest income renters. I want to note just under 70% of that gap can be found in Torrington and Winstead specifically. So to your point, Jocelyn, very, very much a varying need based on the town you're looking at. But regionally, just over half of the units priced for 0 to 30% AMI renters are occupied by renters at a higher income level. And then that then in part leads to those same renters occupying a quarter of the units that are priced for higher income households. On the other side of the market, 80 renters earning 80% and above are occupying a third of the units priced for 0 to 30, and again another third occupying units priced for that kind of middle range of renters, 31 to 80% AMI. So with that, the gap analysis and the housing stock overview as backdrop, we're going to talk about some more recent trends, specifically kind of those coming out of the pandemic in recent years. What you're looking at here is the number of 1 to 4 unit home sales in the Northwest Hills COG going back to 2001. This is a database we at CHFA maintain on a monthly basis. But what you'll see here is that there was a run up in kind of the early 2000s in overall sales volume, peaking in kind of 2005. As the recession hits, we see a kind of bottoming out in overall sales volume in those kind of green bars again in 2011. Gradual increase leading up into 2020 and 2021. These were really kind of outlier years relative to the years prior. We saw a real uptick in demand, so much so that in 2021, the Northwest Hills COG saw 2,300 home sales, and that's the most we've had on record for our data here. But what you'll see here is in recent years, as the Fed has stepped in, I'll get to that in a minute, to kind of cool demand, we've seen a real drop in sales volume in recent years. But what is not corrected is the median sales price that we're seeing. Right now, it's above $300,000 in 2024. I mentioned what the Fed is doing to kind of cool inflation. That's in part the reason we're seeing a real drop in overall sales. What you see here is the average 30-year fixed rate going back to 1971. Right now we're hovering around, it's very variable right now. We're seeing rates anywhere between 6 to 7%. And what you note is historically that's not very abnormal. We were at that level in kind of the 90s. But what is really abnormal, at least recently, is how quickly rates increased from their lows in kind of 2020 and 2021. We saw rates essentially double within a year. Between October 2021 and October 2022, it was the largest year-over-year increase in interest rates we've seen since 1981, when rates got all the way up to 18% during that time. So what you should take away from this is that what really is abnormal, at least in this data line, is how low rates got in 2020 and 2021. And that is leading to what is tentatively called kind of a rate lock effect, where you have a lot of homeowners in Connecticut, and this is data from CHFA, where half of homeowners that have, among homeowners that have a mortgage, half have rates under 4%. So in that kind of this darker orange color and blue, this is under 3 and 3 to 4%. So what this phenomena does when rates are 6.5% right now, you think about someone who bought their home in, say, 2019 for $250,000 at a 3% mortgage. Rates right now are 6.5. You've probably seen prices jump from, on average, $250,000 to $400,000. It's not very attractive for someone to list their home to buy something else when rates have gone up that much and prices have gone up that much, and what they can afford in the market is probably going to be smaller than what they already own. So that's in part of the reason why we've seen the number of active listings on the market drop significantly. This is specifically for the Northwest Hills region. This is active listings from Realtor.com. You see in that kind of blue line, that's the number of active listings by month. And what you'll note right away is that in 2018-19, your region had above 1,000 listings per month, depending on the month you're looking at. There's some seasonality in the summer, winter months. But right at the start of the pandemic, that data line drops significantly. You can see those big red bars indicating a negative year-over-year increase or decrease. And so right now, there's only about 240 homes for sale in February in the region So about a 75%, 80% decrease relative to this time in 2019. So real constrained for sale market. You see kind of those blue bars in recent months indicating a positive year-over-year trend, but we are still nowhere near where we were pre-pandemic. And this resembles statewide trends and also resembles regional trends. And so what you're looking at here is that kind of same active listings change from February 2019 to February 2025, according to Realtor.com by county. And what you'll see is that in red, Connecticut kind of leads the way in this deficit number. We have 80% less listings than we did this time in 2019. That's the most of any state. But, we're kind of in line with this regional trend we're seeing going on, where we're seeing pretty significant deficits in the Northeast and the Midwest, kind of mid-Atlantic down into Virginia. But areas like Florida, Texas, and the kind of the Great Plains regions are seeing actually positive numbers where they have more listings than they did in 2019. There's a lot of reasons for this. Going back to that construction chart, the permits chart. But some areas like in specifically Florida and Texas are having pretty significant insurance issues. You combine that with the interest rate phenomena I mentioned, and there's a lot less migration from areas like Connecticut to areas like Florida because it's just too expensive to move. And so you have a lot of folks who probably have significantly lower mortgage rates, have been in their homes for a while, just not listing their homes. And so that's really constraining where inventory is in Connecticut and in the Northeast generally. But there's just to put a number on it. I mentioned Connecticut overall has an 80% inventory deficit. And this is just kind of showing it by region, where the Northwest Hills region, again, is right in line with the state numbers, or statewide numbers, excuse me. So with that supply constraint, again, this is where a lot of kind of market distortions start to happen relative to 2018, 2019. First and foremost here being the percent of listings sold above their list price. So again, 2018, 2019, this number was about 20%, give or take. But with the supply constraints starting to take hold, we see this number start to climb and climb and climb, kind of peaking in mid-2022, where for Connecticut, generally this number got to about 70-75% of homes selling above their list price. In the Torrington MSA, it was right around 65-70%. We've seen a bit of a moderation since, but again, still well above where we were this time pre-pandemic. And you can see the U.S. number is right around 35% as of the last update. So indication that Connecticut's a pretty significantly hotter market than the nation at large. The other thing that is happening is we're just seeing homes come off the market much faster than they did in the Torrington area, Torrington MSA. Mean number of days until pending, basically until an offer is accepted. 2018, 2019 sometimes was above 100 days. As again, supply started to constrain, there's just limited amount of listings on the market. That number dropped significantly, and right now it's just over 50 days on average. I want to note that you can kind of see that the U.S. and Torrington lines here start to they swap here in 2023. So whereas on average the Torrington market would the U.S. would see homes move faster off the market, that's now reversed. And then we also wanted to talk about what we're seeing in the rental market, right? Because these markets don't happen in a vacuum. And the conditions that current renters are facing, those are your future first-time home buyers. So it's important to kind of keep an eye on those. So here you have the rental vacancy rate by quarter for the U.S., Connecticut, and Litchfield County as well. And even pre-pandemic, Litchfield County had a overall vacancy rate well below that of Connecticut and the U.S. And we started to see a pretty notable decline, even pre-pandemic, for Litchfield County in 2018, 2019. It took Connecticut really until Connecticut as a state overall, really until the start of the pandemic to start seeing really significant decreases in this data line. You see us kind of the state at large bottoming out in roughly late 2022 and rebounding a little bit, rebounding a little bit to like 3.5% as of the last update of this data. But still well below where we were pre-pandemic. And that's obviously the same here. It's in orange for Litchfield County, where there's just a roughly 1% vacancy rate, rental vacancy rate for the county. And similar to that limited supply in the for sale market, we're seeing the kind of market distortions play out in the rental market as well, where we're seeing really notable year-over-year rent growth numbers, particularly in 2022, where the US saw a 10 percentage points year-over-year increase in rents, whereas Connecticut and the Litchfield County market saw a roughly 6.5 percentage point increase. Both of these numbers have kind of, for Connecticut and Litchfield County, have come down significantly to roughly 3.5%, which is positive news from a interest rate cut perspective, given that rent increase makes up roughly a third to like a half of what the Fed looks at for its inflation numbers. So that's some positive news. But with that said, these rent increases are baked into what rental costs are currently in the area, right? So this is just looking at, again, average asking rents by market in Connecticut, and you see in kind of the lighter purple, that's Litchfield County, and between 2018 and 2025, we saw a roughly 30% increase in the average asking rent, going from roughly $1,000 on average to roughly slightly over $1,300. And that's kind of reflected elsewhere in various Connecticut markets. So with that, I think to summarize, I think there's a pretty clear need for additional units and additional income, additional supports, like time to own, for example. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marcus to talk about specifically what CHFA is doing recently.
Thanks, Andrew, for the doom and gloom update.
That's my job.
Right. So as Andrew noted, this part of the presentation is really just to kind of give a brief overview of some programs that CHFA offers and how they may be playing out in the region. So this one here is Time to Own. So for folks who aren't aware, Time to Own is a forgivable down payment assistance program offered by the Department of Housing that CHFA administers on their behalf. So the way it works is if you qualify for a CHFA mortgage, you may be eligible for up to $25,000 in down payment and closing cost assistance through Time to Own. And it's forgivable in that for every year that you're in the home, 1/10 or 10% of that assistance is released as long as you're in the home. So after 10 years, the entire amount is discharged and is no longer due. And if you move in between the 0 to 10-year mark, a prorated portion is due back to the state. Wildly successful, as you can imagine, and one of the great highlights of the program is it's been able to help first-time homebuyers stay competitive in, as you saw, an extremely hot housing market. We have seen last year was a record year for CHFA. We saw the most home loans come through the agency since 2007, right? So you think about that time period and what was going on in 2007. So it does speak volumes to the impact that programs like Time to Own can have, especially for first-time home buyers. And so here's just a glimpse of how the program's played out in Litchfield County. And just to put a point on it, if you look at that median monthly payment on that bottom row of the chart, right? So even though somebody might have somewhat significant lower income, they're able to buy about the same size house and have a payment about the same size, right? Because Time to Own is able to bring, resources to the table. And just as far as you want to go to the next slide, and I tried to advance it myself, sorry. Just to give a sense of geographically where it's spread out. If you want to focus in on Litchfield County, the northwest corner, Torrington, Winchester, Winstead, Burlington, Harwinton, Litchfield are kind of like the main places that the program has been active. And that's mostly because of those income limits and sales limits that Andrew mentioned at the top of the presentation. Next slide. So on the multifamily rental side, CHFA is probably most well known for the low-income housing tax credit program, where the state's authorized allocator of this resource comes to us from the U.S. Treasury Department. Every year we get the amount of resources that we get through the tax credit program is set based on population. So on average, we get about $10 million in LIHTC allocation from the federal government every year. And about 25% of that, or $2.5 million, is set aside for preservation, right? So that's reinvesting in affordable housing to make sure that it stays affordable and that it stays, that we can improve the quality and longevity and sustainability of that program, of that property. The other 7.5 is set aside for the creation of new units. And this is an example of a LIHTC program or development in your area in Torrington, downtown Torrington, if you've ever been through. That's right on the river there. And just so generally how it works is, a development receives tax credits, and then for every dollar of tax credits, they find an investor to purchase the tax credits on, and in purchasing, the investor provides the project equity, right? So it's not quite dollar for dollar. Sometimes it's 90 cents on the dollar. That will provide a huge chunk of resources to help make the affordable housing possible. And next slide is another example, also in Torrington, in Woodland Hills, not too far from downtown. So, and the difference here, and I won't get too much into the weeds on it, but the 9% program that was on the previous slide, so the LIHTC program has kind of like a 9% bucket and a 4% bucket. And just to real quickly, the 9% is that super competitive LIHTC program. So we only are able to allocate about 5 or 6 projects per year through the 9% competitive round. And the 4% is less competitive, and thus we're able to do more with that program. Next slide. More up to speed for the Northwest corner. I know Jocelyn's very familiar with this program, is the Housing Tax Credit Contribution Program. This comes by way of the state, whereas the LIHTC program is a federal program. This is a state tax credit program that CHFA administers on behalf of the state. We get about $10 million annually in allocations under this tax credit program, and nonprofits have to apply and can receive up to $500,000 per award. And sometimes that resource goes towards filling a gap on a much larger project. Sometimes it's really used for small scale projects. And this is a great example in Salisbury, many of you might recognize, of a development that has received HDCC resources over the years. Next slide. And just to give an example, this one's in Simsbury. So the small multifamily CDFI loan pool program, kind of like an unsung, unnecessarily quiet secret in the CHFA portfolio. So we work with a number of CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions. Think about them as like community-based nonprofit banks, right? That work that lend in areas that generally don't receive a whole lot of capital investment, with developers and borrowers who don't generally have access to typical, conventional financing. So our CDFI partners work with developers, excuse me, who then receive resources. So the loan program funds the CDFIs, who then lend the money out to developers to acquire and rehab small scale properties. So the CDFI program, you can see there, is generally between 2 and 20 units, although earlier this year, our board approved our ability to go to down as low as 1 unit buildings, so homeownership is possible. And those just to note here, Simsbury, I know, is not in Northwest Connecticut, but this is kind of it's indicative of this type of housing that's in the picture there. Felt like it's similar to, in terms of age and type, that you might see in some of the towns in Litchfield County. And Simsbury is, not too far away. If you're a foodie, you've been to Present Company, that's kind of right around the corner from there. So just to give you a sense of where it might be. So we're seeing a lot of developments coming mostly from 3 or 4 family units, for 3 or 4 unit properties in our cities. But we're starting to see the programs expand out into the suburbs and into more rural areas, which could be a great opportunity for Northwest Connecticut. Next slide. And finally, the Build for CT program. This is kind of one of those flagship programs that the governor rolled out in the last budget, setting aside up to $200 million in bond allocations for what effectively is helping set aside market rate units and making them affordable to middle income renters. If you think about those kind of larger apartment complexes that you might see that are market rate, amenity rich, many of those are not necessarily affordable to folks who are earning those middle incomes. That's typically between 60% and 120% of the area median income, right? So you think about your nurses, your teachers, your first responders, folks who are critical members of communities, but can't necessarily always rent in those kind of high market rate rental units, and they're not necessarily eligible for what we've seen before with those lower income, LIHTC developments, right, or the HTCC developments. So they're kind of stuck. So what Build for CT is doing is working with developers who are building these market rate rental units, these properties, who may have a gap in their financing that they're working on, and they can come to CHFA and receive, gap financing, and in exchange for that low rate gap financing to make those developments work, they're setting aside about 20% of those units and making them affordable for long term for middle income renters. And so far, really, really popular program, really successful program, and it's I think the governor is hoping to include it in this upcoming budget, so it should sustain. And those are the programs that we wanted to highlight, and happy to answer any questions that folks have.
Thanks, Marcus and Andrew. I have not seen any questions in the Q&A except a question of getting the presentation, and I will send that off to the person that requested it. Again, as we noted, this is recorded, and we will post it on our website and make sure that everyone has access to the recording. But anybody who has a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. We'll give people another minute. And if not, I mean, I don't know. I think you guys did such a great job that no one has any questions.
That can't be true.
Or everyone's eating their lunch and doesn't feel like typing. I got just another request for the okay, there is a question here. I don't know if you guys can see it about whether the CDFI program is available across the state.
It is available across the state, both CDFI partners. We work with technically 3 CDFI partners on the program, but one isn't currently active. But Capital for Change and the Hartford Community Loan Fund are both participating in the program quite heavily. And they both, I know Capital for Change by design works across the state, and Hartford Community Loan Fund, although Hartford is in their name, recently expanded their charter so that they could work throughout the state. So both of those agencies, both of those CDFIs are active and able to reach, corner to corner.
Great. There's a question here from New Milford Affordable Housing asking whether there are any programs or help for ongoing operations of supportive housing for those less than 30% of AMI.
It's a great question, and I know that's something that's been kind of a sticking point for permanent supportive housing development across the state. I don't know. I would defer to our colleagues at the Department of Housing or Development Services, because they typically have the at least the operating subsidies flow through those agencies, and they're more kind of in tune to what resources are out there for operating support.
Yeah, it is a very difficult. Very difficult to make the numbers work on the operating side. Thanks, Marcus. I think there was a follow-up question about the CDFI. Is that program available only to nonprofits or also to municipalities?
No, interestingly enough, the CDFI small multifamily loan pool, I think the typical borrower is the kind of a mom and pop for-profit developer. So you could just be a person. You don't necessarily have to have an LLC or a 501c3. I suppose it doesn't discount your ability to apply, but it's really open to any person who might want to acquire a property and fix it up.
Great. We have another question here from Jacqueline. And she says, I'm on the board of a 100-unit affordable housing complex that has the opportunity to buy a property abutting our complex.
Mhm.
What resources would CHFA have to help us purchase that property to build additional affordable housing?
Yeah, great question. I think what the my go-to recommendation on things like this, I can certainly put you in touch with our multifamily outreach person. But I think what we try to get folks to realize is that we have a what's called the developer engagement process that happens every year, once in the spring and once in the fall, where CHFA and DOH open up the opportunity for people who might be exploring or in various stages of exploring or developing a new project to come in and talk to the agencies, to both folks from CHFA and DOH, to talk through what they're working on, to get, some, feedback on the project and maybe even kind of get you in line for resources, whether it's low-income housing tax credits or other types of resources that the agencies offer. So I would keep an eye out for that. I think, I want to say it's usually in May. So I would say in the next few weeks, you might see something come through um, that would alert to the opportunity to kind of put your name in the queue for the developer engagement process. But again, I can shoot Jocelyn an email afterwards with the contact information for our multifamily outreach person, so who can at least just kind of like give you some more near term feedback.
You guys also have a pretty good website in terms of being able to find contacts there, in my
Yes.
experience.
Yep. Appreciate that. Yes, that's true. Yep.
Great. All right, another question for towns undergoing their plan of conservation and development. I assume that means maybe updating their plan of conservation development. How can they position their priorities to focus on the lowest and highest housing stock?
Hmm.
Maybe I wonder if they're thinking about that gap analysis, and thinking about the biggest gaps regionally that show up. And that's true statewide too, that the when you're looking at the gap analysis, the big gaps are in housing for folks below 30% AMI, right? Sorry, can't see you, Andrew, because the Q&A box is over your face. And the gap for folks above 80% AMI, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the overarching theme is just more housing is better, right? At
Right.
least in my view. But where the most acute need is amongst that 0 to 30 AMI renter group, given the cost burden numbers, right? 75% of them are cost burden, so they are really one, car repair away from some real emergency. So.
Right. I mean, I would say the best thing to do for a town plan of conservation development is make sure you have data for your town as well, to be able to compare it to the region. And um, you know, just to say that we at Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity and the other CHOs as well, we have a specific housing data platform where you can break out your town data, and specifically the HUD CHAS data that Andrew was showing for the region, which shows you the number of cost burdened households in different income brackets in your town. If I were you, I would definitely take a look at that. But as Andrew said, the big takeaway is we definitely just need more supply, but also specifically supply that's dedicated to remaining affordable over time, so we don't continue to see this increase in values and just no way for people to keep up. I will put in the chat a link to our housing needs assessment data that again is broken down specifically. There's a drop down menu and you can pick your town and compare it to other towns. So let me see if I can do that. I don't know how to do that. Well, never mind. It's on our website. So you'll have to find it there, I guess. let's see. And then I just have a bunch of other requests for the slides, and I can share those with folks individually. Anybody else have any questions? If not, just gonna thank Marcus and Andrew for their time today, and CHFA in general for being such a great resource for us as we try to create more housing options that are affordable for everyone here in our region and across the state. So thank you everybody who listened in today, and we hope you'll come back for another webinar soon. Happy Friday.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having us.
everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.